Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first session of our Online Summit 2023. Before we get going and I introduce our wonderful speaker, Leanne, for this morning, I'll just go through a quick bit of housekeeping. Firstly, do submit any questions that you might have during the session using the question tab on your screen below. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can. All our sessions do qualify for CPE in credits, so the instructions for that are also in the screen in the tabs below the video screen. And finally, do head to our sponsor section, which can also be found in the resource tab, to take a look at the companies who are supporting our event. So with that out of the way, now to introduce our speaker. Leanne Potter is a cyber anthropologist. Now, if you're not sure what that is, she will be explaining during her presentation at her own security consultancy, the Anthro Securist. She's also head of SecOps at a major UK retailer. As I mentioned, with the cyber anthropology side of things, Leanne's expertise extends far beyond the confines of traditional cybersecurity practices, and her unique perspectives are enabling her to develop a holistic understanding of the dynamics that shape cybersecurity culture within organizations. So today, during her talk, Leanne will be posing thought-provoking questions. Who's truly at fault when a cyber incident happens? Is it those who fail to heed security advice? Or is it security professionals themselves who inadvertently drive workarounds and sometimes dangerous behaviours? To answer those questions, let me hand over to Leanne to take us through an anthrocentric look at organisational security culture.
Thank you so much. I'd like you to think about, how often do you actually think about locking your door when you leave the house? For most of us, it's muscle memory. It's a well-rehearsed action. So you place your key in the door and you're assuring, bearing persistence or skill that a nefarious person is sufficiently deterred from entering your property and stealing all your things. And at the same time, when you place something under lock and key, that gives that object status. For there must be something worth taking if you've gone to the effort to protect it. And it's a dilemma we've faced ever since we began our fascination with locking things away. And that dilemma is that what deters also attracts. In the physical world, we're all security experts. We ritualize security and we practice it as second nature. Why then are most people so seemingly cavalier with their digital security, with their cyber security? Why has protecting our digital life not become as ritualized as protecting our physical assets? Now, this is a quandary that us in cybersecurity have been scratching our heads over for years, and it's making our jobs incredibly difficult. Insecure behaviours are continuing to proliferate, and that's even including amongst cybersecurity professionals. KnowBe4 did a study recently, and it said that over 50% of cybersecurity professionals are engaging in risky activity themselves. Now, because these insecure behaviours are continuing to occur, even amongst those that know best, there becomes a real pressing need to understand how cybersecurity professionals should be more effective in educating and engaging individuals early on the subject matter. And considering that our advice in cybersecurity hasn't really varied much since the inception of our practice about 20, 30 years ago, depending on who you ask, things like don't click on that, have strong passwords, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. But we're finding people still click on things, people still have rubbish passwords, and people still fall for scams. So you have to ask yourself, if the message is consistent, why isn't it working? Perhaps the real question we need to ask is, who is the actual compromising position here? Is it those on the periphery of security that are not heeding our advice? Or is it us in security not doing a good enough job in communicating those risks? We'll begin to look at those questions today. Today, I'm going to share some insights of free thought leaders who don't work in security. And I asked this very question to them. I said, who is the compromising position and what can we do about it? This talk aims to challenge your gut feeling and why people outside of the security team don't do the things they should do to keep themselves and the organization safe. And this talk is going to start with a bit of a state of the union about where people perceive cybersecurity as from an outsider's perspective. And then I'm going to share with you the 3 ideas presented by the behavioural scientists and transformation specialists I recently interviewed. And we can look at how we build empathy and start getting people to do what we want them to do, and how we can collaborate better to enable that. Welcome to Compromising Positions, and I am Leanne Potter. As said in the intro, I'm one of a handful of anthropologists who specialise in this space, considering the cultural factors of cybersecurity. Anthropology is the study of human culture. So as a cyber anthropologist, I originally started as a digital anthropologist, studying the nature of how we engage with digital cultures. So things like Second Life, if anyone remembers that, things like that was my speciality back in the day. But then I moved into cybersecurity. So now I look at how cultural factors impact cybersecurity. And my work, as said in the intro, is currently supported by the technical side of my role, which is a head of security operations. So I look after the technical controls, processes, and toolings for a major supermarket retailer. So my role, I see it as, my profession is combining the humanities and the technical to really ensure a human-centric approach to the discipline of cybersecurity. And it's been my pleasure to speak on this topic around the world at various academic and industry conferences, now more regularly on my podcast every Thursday, which is also called Compromising Positions, which this talk is based on. I was inspired to do this podcast because I read an article and it was "Stick a Hot Poker in My Eyes, Cybersecurity Awareness Training is Incredibly Boring" by Dr. Reeves. And in that amazing paper, he went into detail about one of the really interesting things in his research was that when it came to cybersecurity awareness, all the academics only interviewed cybersecurity professionals and asked them, what do you think of your security awareness program and how successful it is? Nobody ever thought to actually ask the individuals taking part in that. And so Compromising Positions was born because I wanted to interview non-cybersecurity people about cybersecurity. I wanted to find out actually how could we do better. So in the podcast, we interview people from traditional tech roles, so software developers, data analysts, cloud specialists and stuff, but also non-technical roles, so people in finance, marketing, compliance, PR. And alongside this one, which is what this talk is based on, people working in psychology and behavioural scientists as well. I asked them about their experiences working with the security team and how they would actually like the security team to engage with them and explore a holistic approach to enabling good practices. And it's some of the discussions that I've had so far that I'm going to share with you today. And these are the people I'm going to be yielding on. And they all have their own podcast as well. And I would really recommend if you check them out because it's really fantastic. On a side note, believe you me, the irony isn't lost on me that the only decent photo of me presenting in this conference is me as a security person saying no in another language and finger wagging. Sometimes you can't help but be typecasted. So the first thing we're going to look at today is empathy. And I think a good place to start with understanding why insecure behaviours continue in our organisation is by really considering the intangibility of our digital valuables, that precious data behind a screen instead of a door. After all, unlike the windows of the house, we can't see who's watching us. And therefore, I think people really struggle to visualize a digital assailant in binary. These online threats really seem ephemeral to people, and they can have real consequences in the real world, and we just need to kind of communicate that better. I also think there's a real unfair expectation made by cybersecurity professionals that those who don't work in cybersecurity really need to be well versed in spotting potentially malicious threats, along with the expectation that most can and should perform absolutely huge cognitive feats to remember really complex and unique passwords for every single platform they engage with. Therefore, we've got an audience that firstly, might not understand the risks in a tangible way. And secondly, and even if they do understand the risks, the mitigations for the risk are so non-anthrocentric that as a result, even if they wanted to protect themselves, they're often set up to fail unless they receive special training, we have technology to assist, or if they live in a constant state of vigilance or paranoia, which might be ideal traits for someone working in cybersecurity, but not for everyone else, I would say. Now, the wild west of the internet is making it really difficult for anyone to be safe online. But there's also been very little empathy for those who have been a victim of cybercrime. And this is often taken the form of unpleasant name calling from those that do fall prey to the actions of cybercriminals. For example, we call them stupid, idiots, dumb, the weakest link. It's really not endearing people to us, and it's causing people to push away from us. And even when our peers have a cybersecurity breach, we're straight on there on LinkedIn going, oh, did you see that company had a breach? Are they stupid? Didn't they do the wrong thing? That's security people. So we're even rubbish to our peers as well. And the language we use absolutely matters. And this is something from the first insight I want to share with you with Matt Ballantyne that we discussed together. There were two things he said about language, and I think they're interesting points. Now, the first thing he said was using the language of your profession, so talking in jargon or technical terms, is a really good way to prove you are who you say you are. You give yourself professional kudos, it makes you feel good. But it turns a lot of people off as well when we do that. And I can totally see his point. When I talk to non-cyber security people about security concepts, I can literally see them clamping up like I'm asking them a complicated math question. And it might make me feel good, but is it really helping us build empathy and collaboration? And the other thing he discussed was our over-reliance on military metaphor is doing us absolutely no favors. Now, we do have a lot of ex-forces in our industry, and it makes sense. There's plenty of crossover there. But he says it can feel a bit macho and, according to Matt, quite alienating. Now, remember, Matt doesn't work in cybersecurity. These are his words. And I started thinking about that, and I started thinking about the terms we use like perimeter, breach, zero trust, demilitarized zone, things like that, when he brought up this point. And it kind of reminded me of something I read back during the COVID times. And it was an article criticizing the government rhetoric around stopping the virus using military metaphor. It painted the way the government was painting the virus as an invader or a wicked enemy by saying we're at war with the virus. This article sort of suggests that such language at first was quite useful to help mobilize resources and underscore the seriousness of the situation to a certain community. However, because of the ongoing use of military rhetoric, war metaphors and such, it actually had an undermining effect on the efforts to control the virus, especially, apparently, to the communities most vulnerable to COVID. And it went on to explain, when you talk about cancer and cancer treatments, it's quite similar there as well. So if you perceive the illness, the cancer, as an active enemy, it can actually lead people to feel more fatalistic and more likely to perceive any preventative behaviors as futile. And in using militaristic language in the context of cancer treatment, it suggested that it inevitably defines those who do succumb to the disease as losers of the battle, or that they didn't try hard enough. And as a result, if you don't feel like you're a soldier and you have the fight in you, that leads to discouragement and shame amongst the people that are affected, which is what we don't want. And if we bring that back to cyber security, could the language we use be doing the same thing? And this is a sweeping statement, but I think it holds true. Most people are not actually combatants in this, and I'm going to say it, I'm going to go against my own advice, this cyber war. Could this militaristic language actually be making people feel more helpless than stirring? We all know about FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and too much FUD actually causes people to switch off and put their head in the sand. That's human nature. So we need to be mindful about an us and them narrative and just be nicer to people and empathetic to the situation they're coming in, to the lack of understanding that they have about cybersecurity. So my suggestion to you is, and this is what Matt said as well, is, stop being too much of either a cyber nerd or a cyber general. Just be more empathetic. Now, the other thing I'm going to bring up today is collaboration with a little bit of empathy, because empathy touches everything we do. So you might be thinking, so far I'm saying non-cybersecurity people can do no wrong, but that's not what I'm saying. Negligence is definitely occurring on an individual and a business level. But what I think is seldom discussed is the cultural drivers that lead to such negligence, both the unintentional, so human error, lack of education awareness, or even intentional due to poor practice, so people underestimating risk, competing priorities, and other conscious decisions that lead to deprioritization of security controls. Now, I think a lot of this can be avoided with better communication. And that's what Melina and I talked about. She said in an organization, we have a tribe mentality. Now, me as an anthropologist, putting my anthropologist hat back on, I would totally agree with that. Now, this tribe mentality exists because we seek to find people who are like us, because there is safety in numbers. And this is how silos are actually formed, because we are drawn to that safety in numbers. So the workplace is divided into tribes. So you've got an engineering tribe, you've got an architecture tribe, you've got a cybersecurity tribe. And we're all there competing for resources and dominance. And where there is an issue with silos, it's because we don't really see those other tribes as individuals, and we build an us and them narrative. We all have competing incentives because we're all targeted in different ways. So my goal as a cybersecurity person isn't typically aligned with the targets of the objectives of, say, the engineering team, for example. So when this happens, it's kind of like saying that in order for one department to win, the other has to lose, which really sucks. And we need to really avoid that. And we really need to build a team company, is what Melina says. Well, maybe not to this extreme. I don't want any HR issues or anything like that. But team company means building affinities. And in building affinities, we can only do that if we get to know each other and break out a character type and try and find common ground and build communities. But we need to really be mindful of how those interactions are framed. And Melina calls this, it's not about the cookie. Now, I want to paint a scene for you to describe what she means by it's not about the cookie. So you're walking down a street with your friends, you're chatting, having a good time. You smell the most amazing smell. It's the most buttery, chocolatey, hint of salt cookies. You can't help it. You have to drop everything and go find these cookies. And when you follow your nose, you see a huge line coming out of this shop. You think, these are going to be the best cookies ever. So you go in and you buy a load of cookies. Now, you had no intention of doing that. But the framing of the delicious smell, the confirmation of others that these cookies were great, made you buy. Same story again. You're walking down the street with your friends, chatting, having a good time, and then someone stops you. They push a lot of flyers in your face. Maybe they have a tray and like, I've got really nice cookies. Try some, free samples, half off. Please, please. And it's generally desperate, maybe a bit of a nuisance. Now, in this world, those cookies are exactly the same. Just as delicious as the others. But, Melina says, it's not about the cookie, but the framing of how you receive this information or be enticed to making a decision to buy the cookie that matters. In one way, it felt really good. In the other way, it felt really forced. It doesn't matter about the cookie, but the way the cookie is sold. Now, what has this got to do with collaboration? Well, I think Melina's story shows us we need to be mindful of framing our engagements to be one of delight rather than pouncing on people. We need to create a setting which people want to seek us out rather than forcing people to engage with us. Our wares remain the same, but the way we package ourselves matters. And this leads to my final set of insights from my third expert, Christian. Christian said we need to think about how we present the controls we put in place. They have to be human-centric. Every company is employing human beings. For now, at least. I'm sure there's quite a lot of AI conversations going on around there. But for now, companies employ human beings. Therefore, we all have the same challenges. We all have the same human OS operating system. So let's look at the code. We often design things for how we would like people to behave rather than how they actually behave. Now, a machine will slavishly follow what it's been programmed to do, but humans don't. And for us in cybersecurity, that's a shame, but it's a fact, and we have to work with that. So the way we frame our communications and our controls really matters, and we need to start seeking feedback on those controls. We need to start showing more respect to the people we're trying to protect. And recall what I was saying about the language we use. Well, along with having overly restrictive controls, you've got to make sure that those controls that you're implementing are not signaling to your target audience that they are not to be trusted. Because when you give the signal to others that they're not to be trusted, they are definitely going to respond in kind. If we are not respectful, it will set a bad taste in that experience. Now, they might not circumvent a cyber rule, but they might exact revenge elsewhere. The employee experience, I can't stress this enough, really matters. And bad security controls encourages non-compliance and small acts of rebellion. So how can we create a safe environment that builds up this good faith? Well, firstly, Christian says we need to stop treating everyone, like all the employees, like they're master criminals and they're all up to no good. Now, only a very, very small minority will be. And is it really worth irritating everyone else with overly restrictive controls that prevent people from doing their job? His other suggestion, which I really like, is try and follow a legislative model. So just like when PCI DSS or ISO give us a heads up about a new requirement, they don't just mandate and say, change everything tomorrow. They give you plenty of warning about what's coming up. And you can do the same in your organizations. Before you put in a control, tell people in advance it's coming and, give them an effective date. Get feedback. Test how it will affect people. Explain why that control is coming into place. The feedback loop here is so incredibly important. And Christian went on to say, when you think about it, it's really incredible that we put so much effort into the general customer experience than the way they access things when we build stuff. But that same logic is never really applied to our employees. Our employees are our customers. And as I've stressed enough, it's them we need to really show respect to too. So a legislative model, I think, is a really good idea for new controls. But what do you do about your old controls that are already existing? Well, you can test the effectiveness of that policy or rule by seeing how many people break that rule. If 1 or 2 people break that rule, you've got a people problem. However, if you've got lots of people breaking that rule, then you've got a policy problem. And there's probably a good reason why this keeps happening, and you really need to find out the cause. But my favorite suggestion from Christian is to ask, what really pisses you off? Like, not what annoys you, but really viscerally makes you angry. Use that as your radar. Your people are your radar for this. If lots of people are complaining about a rule, that is definitely something to investigate. Because rules that people don't respect are rules that people are going to break. And you don't want that. Now, this is just a small taste of the Anthro-centric conversations I've been having with some incredible thought leaders. So after all that, who is the compromising position here? Is it those on the periphery of security who are not heeding our advice? Or is it us in security, the actual compromising position? I think it's all of us. I think we can all do better in securing our environment and ourselves. But when I talk about compromising positions, I don't just mean a position that will lead to a compromise. There's another type of compromise, of course. That is the compromise where there's an agreement or a settlement reached by each side making a concession. I think command and control security isn't serving us anymore. For too long, it's actually been us in cybersecurity that have been the dangerous type of compromising position because we've made ourselves so unapproachable. Nobody wants to engage with us. We put controls in place that not only prevent people from doing their job, but also annoy them in the process. And that often leads to dangerous workarounds that are more dangerous than the thing we're trying to prevent in the first place. In doing so, we've lost our early warning system. We've made securing our organization more difficult. We've made it a chore to be avoided or delegated to someone else. Security will take care of that. But the secret is we do have room to compromise in the other meaning of the word. And I want to stress, compromise does not mean one person has to lose so another one can benefit. Mutually beneficial compromise means that everyone wins. But to understand where we can make concessions, we've got to work towards a deeper cultural understanding of the environment and the people we're trying to protect. We need to be more empathetic about the context in which our colleagues are working in that prevent them from acting in a more cyber secure manner. We need to collaborate better with all areas of the organisation to unify against this really complex and elusive cyber threat landscape. And I think in doing so, we can stop being the position in which we say no and potentially increase cyber threats through obscurity and avoidance. And instead, become a position people want to engage with. In doing so, we can increase our security posture and overall reduce risk. I want you to recall that I started this talk with an analogy about humans being good at physical security. I still stand by that. And we are to an extent, but I think even that is flawed by the human element. After all it takes for us when we leave the house is to be distracted, to forget to lock the door. All it takes for us is that lock not to be installed correctly and maybe it'll fail. The human element is consistent in both physical and virtual security. And I would like to invite you to join me on this journey to explore how we can do better in this space for our own sanities, but also for the people we serve. I want you to think about this. What we say matters. How we say it matters. Where we say it matters. And to whom we say it matters. What, how, where, to whom all really matters, and we can do better in this space. Think about what type of compromising position you want to be in your organisation today. Thank you for spending the time with me this morning. If you would like to hear more about an Anthro-centric approach to cybersecurity, you can listen every Thursday. We interview lots of really interesting guests on there, and you can find us on YouTube and all good and bad. podcast platforms. And special thank you to my free speakers I've interviewed so far for providing some amazing content for this. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for that, Leanne. I think it's a really interesting perspective and probably one a lot of our audience haven't maybe considered before. I would encourage everyone to find that podcast. If you search for Leanne on LinkedIn, she's posting about it very regularly as well. So if that's your easiest way to discover it, do head over to there. We have just 5 minutes for questions. So for our audience, if you've got any questions for Leanne, please do send those in. But I just wanted to pick up on a couple of the things you mentioned that I thought were really important. And one of them was you said, our employees are our customers. So I think it's a really interesting mindset to have in terms of you're trying to sell them a way of behaving. Is there any examples of like successes you've had with kind of taking that approach or taking this anthrocentric approach in general?
Yeah, so I recall one of the things I like to do is not every organization is going to be able to hire an anthropologist to come in and specialize in cybersecurity. However, most organizations, especially large ones, if they are customer facing, do have a user experience, research team. And they are incredible at asking the right questions and really understanding actually what do people mean when they say it's like this or I want to do this. And I think one of the biggest successes I've had is engaging with those teams, going up to them and saying, how do we actually make the login experience a lot easier for people? And that can be the login experience for customers, but also employees. Now, I recall working for an organization and they had a call center, and call centers are obviously very high stress environments. You have to, targeted, you have to respond quickly. Lots of spreadsheets, lots of portals to log in. And I remember just saying to the user research team, let's do some research on this. Let's ask these individuals how we can make their lives easier so that they can do their jobs better, but also understand they've got a lot of tabs. Are they reusing passwords for everything? Because this organization didn't have single sign-on at the time. And obviously that poses a huge risk because one of the portals was a lot of sensitive data. So if they were reusing passwords there, then obviously that could lead to a data breach if that credential got leaked. And it was just having those initial honest conversations about, I'm not here to judge. And that's what needs to be key. It's not about seeking punitive damage against people. It's about coming in with a curiosity. And I think that curiosity piece is often lacking, not because cybersecurity people aren't curious, don't care. I'm not saying that at all. We just haven't had time to care. But I think we need to start making time to care because we've often been the most under-resourced, underfunded, underloved organization in the business. And our, security says no culture, I believe, stems from the fact that because of that, we have to say no because no one else would do it. We've not been able to have eyes on all the issues. So the best thing to do in a self-preservationist attitude is to say no to more things, just so that you don't put anyone else at risk. But now that the tooling is getting so better, now that we've got an ability to, I can Zoom or go on Teams with anyone in the business at any point if I want to. That communication effort can be really concentrated if I want to. We need to start leveraging the tools to enable us to focus more on the human side.
Yeah, and just in our last minute, an audience questions come in. Really great talk, Leanne. So positive feedback there, but they're talking about feedback. Any particularly good methods of gathering feedback on those pain points that you mentioned, identifying the rules that people find particularly painful?
Yeah, one sort of key thing is, especially during induction, it's good to check rules and things like that. If you're finding, and this is where you work with your L&D and induction team, if you're finding people when they're talking about certain policies, they're asking lots of questions, that's a good thing actually, and actually gives you a really insight into grey areas of where that policy might not be clear, or that there might be a potential for bending the rules a little bit and things like that. So seek out feedback in every kind of opportunity you can, but do so by being really honest about why you're getting feedback. It's not, as I say, to be punitive. It's actually to make their lives easier, not the other way around.
Yeah, I think, like you said, like the communication element is so key as well, explaining why you're doing things, why you're implementing tasks, because people don't like to be forced to do things. They like to know, well, why am I doing that? Um, that has unfortunately brought us to the end of our session. For anyone that wants to share this presentation with colleagues or friends, the session will be live on demand via the same link you have accessed it through. Thank you, Leanne, for
Thank
such a
you.
thought-provoking session, and I would recommend our audience do check out her podcast. And for those of you staying with us during this online summit, please join us in 15 minutes for our next session, hosted by my colleague Kevin Poirot on preparing for the inevitable, mastering cyber incident response. Thank you so much, Leanne. And with that, I will close out this first session of the day. Thanks,
Thank you
Leanne.
for listening. Bye.